Hello, my little Calibris. I hope you're all doing well. I have a fun project for this episode starring this small cabinet. I picked it up for $25, about 30 minutes from me, hoping it was solid wood or at least plywood. I've had a specific design in my mind for a while now, and this felt like a great piece to test it out on. Since it's on the smaller side, it's a good way to experiment without too much commitment. But once I got it home and took a closer look, I realized it was a mix of solid wood and veneer over MDF. Now, that didn't necessarily ruin my plans since MDF doesn't scare me. I just need to take the right steps to seal it properly so it holds up over time. And yes, that means this one is getting painted. So if painted furniture isn't your thing, I get it. I recommend checking out my last video where I worked on a set with a wood stain finish. I will pop that link in the top right corner for you. But without further ado, let's get to work on this piece. I started by removing the hardware, the drawers, and the doors, then gave it a thorough wipe down with my handy dandy mix of vinegar, Dawn dish soap, and hot water. While I was cleaning the piece, I noticed some screws on the bottom. I'm not sure what they're called, but they're the kind that helps hold everything together, like the ones you see in IKEA furniture, which makes it easy to assemble at home. After seeing them, I don't know what came over me, but I decided to take the whole thing apart. And at that point, I really started regretting spending $25 on this. Once it was fully disassembled, I took a mental break from the design process, mostly because I wasn't sure if my plan would even work, and moved on to something I'm familiar with and honestly really good at, which is building a base. I had the bottom piece in front of me, so I started measuring how wide it was to get the overall dimensions for the feet and aprons. I picked up some 5/4 red oak from my local lumberyard and had them do a parallel rip, then mill it down to 1 1/8 inches. This clip just shows me measuring out my front apron. I made it a little longer than needed since I planned to trim off both ends to make sure everything was square. Then I measured out 10 inches for the feet. Okay, so I wanted a specific grain pattern for the front feet. So I cut another 10 inches to make that happen. Next, I ran the board through my table saw to break it down further. I was able to get both the side aprons and the front apron from the longer piece. And then I used those two 10-inch blocks to cut out those front feet in just a single pass. Once I was done with that, I trimmed the aprons to the final size using my chop saw. Next, I pulled out all my old templates to figure out which one I wanted to use. I already had one in mind, but I wanted to play around and see if I liked the idea of adding more of a curve to the foot. But I ended up sticking with the original plan and proceeded to trace the template onto the wood. This is one of our signature foot designs, which means I have a bunch of templates in different lengths based on that same style. I actually copied it from a United Furniture dresser I refinished a few years ago, and we've slowly evolved the design over time. But I will list all the measurements on the screen for you though. You have probably seen me make these templates in past videos using the same measuring rulers I always use. And if you haven't, just go check out my previous videos. You won't regret it. Nothing has changed since, but let me know in the comments if you want me to walk through the template steps each time. Now that the feet are roughly to shape, it's time to bring them to their final form using my template and flush trim bit. I'm trying something a little different this time with how I attach the template. I'm adding tape to the template and the wood, then sandwiching the double-sided tape in between. So that extra layer acts as a barrier, which makes it easier to separate once I'm done rounding and helps protect the template, especially since this one is made from MDF backing material. After that, I went ahead and assembled the base so it could be completely done and out of the way before I jumped back into working on the frame. I didn't feel like doing the dowel method this time, so I just used pocket holes to put it all together. Pocket holes felt quicker and easier, and since this piece isn't heavy, I'm not too worried about strength, especially with glue added on top. Before connecting the sides to the front, I decided to round over the front of the base to soften it up a bit. I ended up routing not just the inside edge, but the outside of the foot too, which gives the illusion that the foot is a bit slimmer than it really is. Once that was done, I drilled the rest of the pocket holes so they were ready to go before attaching the side aprons. I glued and clamped them overnight since it was getting dark out. The next day, I finished screwing everything together, but started debating whether I wanted to add a double-tiered look or leave it as is. It didn't necessarily need the look, but I felt like it wouldn't hurt the design, so I just went for it. Now that the base is fully prepped, aside from staining, I turn my attention back to the frame. This right here is the top, and I'm sanding it with a used 120 grit. I wasn't necessarily trying to remove the finish, just scuff it up enough for the primer to really grip. But there was quite a bit of swelling under the surface, which is why you see some areas exposing the MDF underneath. So I grabbed my Bondo to patch those spots and any other damage I came across. Once it was fully dry, I went over everything with my orbital sander using that same 120 grit. Then I followed up with my surf prep and sponge pad to get into those curved areas on the front. The top was really the only part that needed attention for repairs, since I will actually be damaging the rest of the frame on purpose with my new toy. Now let me explain. I picked up a rotary tool from Win specifically for this project. I already have a bandsaw from them that I love, so when I saw the rotary tool at a good price, I figured why not? The bit I'll be using is, I believe, called a sphere rotary burr. It's basically a wood carving bit for woodworkers. From the research I've done, I went with the fine version because the coarse one felt like too much for the MDF piece I'm working on. Which brings me to the design. I'll post some example photos from Pinterest on the screen. But the look I'm going for is a DIY version of the Naguri wood texture. It is a traditional Japanese technique where the wood is hand carved with uneven grooves that catch the light in such a cool way. It adds texture without being too loud and gives the surface this soft, flowing movement that's hard to ignore. I first saw this technique from two insanely talented creators and knew right away I had to try it. They both used routers with custom jigs that allowed them to swing the tool back and forth to create the effect. Now, I do have a router, but I didn't feel like figuring out how to build a jig, so getting the rotary tool felt like the next best thing. But you could use a CNC machine for this. I know not everyone has one, or even access to one like I do. So this is a more affordable option for anyone who wants to get creative and has plenty of patience. Anyways, right here I'm marking out a quick guide just to get a rough idea of where to etch the design on each piece. I had already done the design on the sides and quickly realized this was going to be a long process. To create the design, I did a quick tap with my tool to make the bit create a small rounded indentation on the MDF. I overlapped each one just a little to avoid any gaps as I worked my way down each row. I wanted you to quickly hear how it sounded, so I apologize if it hurt your ears. But I highly recommend wearing all of the safety gear like earmuffs or noise-canceling headphones, a respirator, a full face if you have one, or if you're using a half-face one, then make sure to throw on some safety goggles too. This gets pretty messy and you'll be covered in dust by the end of the day. By the time I was done with the third row, I really wanted to speed things up. So instead of just tapping, I started tapping down, then lightly swirling the bit as soon as it hit the surface to make a slightly bigger circle. I wasn't applying much pressure, I was just letting the bit do its thing. I also wasn't going too deep to avoid any issues with blowing through the other side. But this created a larger indentation, which helped me cover more area before going back to the smaller 3-row pattern. I just kept repeating those same steps across the whole surface. After I finished the drawer, I clamped it against the front of the frame to make sure my lines still lined up well with the textured design. I don't expect the design to match perfectly across the whole piece, but I wanted it to feel relatively consistent, like an organized random effect, if that makes sense. But I wanted to show a couple different clips of me working on the design just to show how important the line guide was for keeping me on track. I'm not sure if I already mentioned this, but this took a very, very long time. I slowly worked on it over the last couple of weeks in between other projects. I feel like if I would have done it all at once, I would have lost my mind and my neck would have been killing me from wearing the respirator for so long. But all in, it took me a total of 6.5 hours just to carve out this design. About an hour and a half for each side and 3.5 hours for the full front. Now, would I do this again? No. Well, probably not for an entire frame, but maybe as an accent feature. Now that I could do. Alright, now that every part is carved out, I grabbed this super flexible pad from Surprep to lightly sand everything. It's their fine grit pad, which I believe is around 180 to 220 grit. It worked out great because it was soft enough to get into every groove without messing up the design. It smoothed out any harsh spots and helped everything blend together a bit more. After that, I wiped the surface with a nearly dry lint-free towel. Since this is MDF, I didn't want to wet it too much, just enough to collect any dust from sanding. Once everything was wiped down, it was finally time to prime the piece. I used a roller to apply the primer, which I am using Ben Shellac Primer by Zenzer. I didn't feel like doing a full clean out of the sprayer afterwards, so rolling it on just made everything quicker and easier. Now, Ben Shellac is pretty much the GOAT. Not only does it block stains and offer ultimate adhesion, but it does an excellent job sealing up MDF. Alright, MDF tends to have a bad rep, and honestly, it's not without reason. Since it's a composite material, it's super absorbent. If it comes into contact with water or any kind of liquid, it can swell up fast. That's why using a shellac-based primer is key. It rarely penetrates and seals off the surface, preventing any moisture from soaking in. After the first coat of primer, I looked over the piece to check for any imperfections that might need patching. Once it dried, I sanded everything smooth and added a second coat of primer. When that was fully dry, I started assembling the frame so I could spray it. I reused most of the original IKEA screw things to attach everything, but a few were either missing or broken. With that said, I patched the holes on the top side panels where those would have gone. I couldn't get the original screws out of the top piece no matter what I tried. So instead, I drilled the patch holes a bit deeper so the top could sit flush with the sides. I was planning to secure it with some L brackets, but I still needed to purchase those. So for now, I just placed everything together without officially attaching the top so I could get it painted. This piece originally had grooves in the back for a backing panel, but the original one was missing. I just picked up a new one from Home Depot and had them cut it to size for me, which saved me some time. After placing the top on the piece, I noticed a couple of bumps right in the middle. They lined up exactly where the dowels were in the center of the sidewalls, so I'm pretty sure it was my fault. Look, off camera, I had been pressing down on the top top quite a bit, trying to force it into place before realizing I needed to drill new screw holes a little deeper where I had patch on the sides. Luckily, it was an easy fix. I just sanded down the top until everything was nice and even again, which meant I exposed the MDF. But honestly, I saw that as a good thing because now the whole surface was smooth and level. I just sealed it up with a couple more coats of shellac primer and it was good to go. So with spring upon us now, I've been in the mood for something light and airy. I initially thought a creamy white would give it a stone-like look, but it ended up looking too much like the primer. It needed more contrast, so I mixed in this orangey tan color I had on hand, but that turned into a pale salmony tan color that I just wasn't feeling. So I looked through what I had and found some Jungle Camouflage by Bear Paint. It's a light sage green with a hint of mint, and I used it for a commission piece a few months ago. I don't know why I didn't go with it from the start because it was perfect. It's soft, it's light, and has just the right mix of green and blue to feel fresh and springy. While the paint was drying, I decided to stain the base in a wheat tone I already had to complement the paint. Once I was done with that and everything was dry, I sealed it up with a couple coats of matte polyacrylic to finish it up. Before I started putting everything back together, I grabbed some hardware from my inventory to use on this piece. I only needed 4 knobs and luckily I had exactly that amount. 3 of them were from the same set, but the 4th one was from a different batch I had picked up a while ago. The gold tone was just slightly off when I compared them all together. It wasn't super noticeable, but I could tell, so I applied a light layer of rub and buff to all of them to make them look more uniform. Next up, I drilled in the door stoppers while the piece was still upside down and officially attached the top using those L brackets I mentioned earlier. I don't have a clip of me actually doing it since my whole body was in the way, but I'll pop in a clip so you can see what it looked like. Finally, I secured the base using Craig pocket screws and then attached the doors to the frame. Alright y'all, here is a quick reminder of what it looked like before, and here are the final results. This might be one of my favorite reimagined pieces so far, but you will have to let me know what you think. Now, it hasn't even been listed for a full week yet, so it didn't sell before I had a chance to sit down and upload this video. But I still want to walk you through the material costs, what I've listed it for, and this time I'm going to show you the views and saves it's gotten on Facebook Marketplace so far. I got this piece for $25. I spent another $25 on a slab of oak, but since my partner and I split it, we both only needed like half. My share for the base came out to be $12.50. Paint-wise, I already had everything on hand except for one of the white paints I originally used, which turned out to be a waste. That little sample cost me $7.37. I spent $12.63 on screws, brackets, and washers, which I needed specifically for this build. The new backing was $15.13. I didn't end up using all of it, but I'm counting the full cost towards this piece anyway. I usually budget $10 for miscellaneous items, but for this one I spent $12.41 on things like paint rollers, shop towels, and a roller tray. That brings the total to $85.04 before factoring in tools. If you already have a rotary tool in that sphere burr bit, this would have been your cost. But I didn't, so I'm assigning the full tool cost to this project. The rotary tool was $22.71 and the burr bit was $18.74. That brings the total materials and tool cost to $126.49. Now, I've got this piece listed for $500. And just for the sake of a clean breakdown, let's say it sells for that. My profit would be $373.51. I spent about 15 hours on this one, which means I'd be making roughly $24.90 per hour. Once it sells, I'll update the description below with the final sale price if you're curious. I don't expect it to sit long though. As for views and saves, here's what the stats look like over the past 6 days in my area. I also posted this in another major city nearby since I'll be heading that way soon. I included free delivery in that listing and mentioned that an electronic deposit will be required to claim it. I've done this before with no issues. I think people trust me because of my reviews and ratings on Facebook Marketplace, so no one thinks I'm a scam. Here are the stats for the past 3 days in that area so you can compare the two and see where it's gaining more traction. But that's pretty much it for this one. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments and you know what to do. Stay tuned for the next one.